My name is Callistus. I work as a procurement officer in a rubber and plastic company in Lagos, Nigeria. I am a diligent and focused person. I set my eyes on goals that are achievable within my space, and God's willing, I have been able to achieve and establish myself in my chosen career. I used to have this married woman in my office who happens to be our team lead in our department. Mrs. Chinwe is a workaholic and perfectionist who believes in the saying that what is worth doing at all is worth doing well. She can drag you from your nest of emptiness into a barn of result-driven abundance, as she is an achiever. Amongst all of us in that department, I was the only colleague of ours who she is closer to, owing to the fact that I am also a workaholic just like her, and that naturally endeared her towards me. She treated me as a colleague and also as a friend. She shares some personal issues and achievements with me that which she won't share with any other female colleague. She had this trust in me that I would never betray her, hence her utmost confidence in me. With all these charming qualities of my boss, Mrs. Chinwe, she is unfortunate to be in a toxic marriage. Her husband is a very uncivilized man who treats his wife in a disrespectful way. According to Ms. Chinwe, her husband is an authoritarian, domineering, and egoistic person. She said her husband would hurl insults and abusive words on her at the slightest provocation. She further said her husband sees her as a career woman who must also function as a housemaid at home. She complained that she does all the chores at home by herself, including washing her husband's clothes. Each time she mentioned to her husband the need to hire a housemaid, the husband would flare up, saying, "What is the big deal in doing simple house chores?" This is a husband who doesn't do any chores at home, who now has the effrontery to call house chores a simple task. All this went on for years as she suffers both emotional and physical abuses from her husband. It got to a point in her marriage where she completely lost all the affections she had for her husband, and both started living in the house as flatmates, even though they had an 8-year-old son together. Each time she arrives at the office, she breathes a breath of fresh air, as this is the only period she has to be happy and feel good. When it's time to go home after work, she feels this unusual depression in her, knowing fully well she is going back home to meet a toxic and abusive husband. She unconsciously, on a daily basis, shared her unpleasant experience with me from the ends of her husband. This got me emotional and felt pitied for her. As a result, I always give her a form of consolation by assuring her that everything will be fine. As time goes on, she got fond of me and my consoling advice that when she gets home, she would always call to thank me for the words of assurances that I had given her. I gradually start falling in love with her and care more about her. This is a senior colleague who is 11 years older than me. She is a married woman while I am still single but in a relationship. After close of work each day, myself and my boss do stay back to work on some pending files that will make our works easier the following day when we resume. This also enables us to stay back in order to avoid the congested traffic on the road back home. This particular idea of her staying back in the office after work was born out of our workaholic natures, but soon transcend into something personal, as she needed to share her burden of marriage with me and receiving some form of consolation in terms of advice from me. This new practice of hers continues for weeks as I was already madly in love with my boss. Then one day, as we were about to round up from work officially by 5 p.m., she received a distress call from her husband, hurling insults on her for only washing his clothes without ironing them. She apologized to her husband, stating that she was tired as a result of office work-related stress combined with her daily house chores. The husband at the other end did not find her apologies justifiable and instructed her that anytime she arrives home from work that same day, she should ensure she does the ironing of his clothes. Instantly, her mood changes from bad to worse as it was time to close from work. I waited for others of our colleagues to leave for their respective houses while I started consoling her again as usual. This time around, she was inconsolable as she was crying profusely due to emotional abuse she constantly suffers from her husband. I was confused as what to do next, as this is the first time I will see her shed tears. I then moved closer to where she was and offered her a tissue paper to wipe her tears, and also sat beside her to give her a shoulder to lean on. This is the first time of mine having closer body contact with my boss, and sincerely I do not have anything ulterior in mind while lending her a shoulder to lean on. Then I noticed that immediately she leaned on my shoulder, her cries and weeping increases, so I had to start consoling her by patting her back and gently rubbing her hair. Thereafter, she stopped crying and started sobbing. At this moment, I felt I had already done my duty as a pacifier and wishes to detach myself from her, bearing in mind that she is my senior colleague and boss and also a married woman. As I made my way in detaching myself from her and making her sit comfortably by resting her head against the back and headrest of the chair, I noticed that she grabs me very well, indicating that I shouldn't leave at that moment. So I had to tarry a little longer while I kept on patting her back while she sobs. Thereafter, I started shifting my thoughts from being a consoler and pacifier to having a beautiful woman that I have been lustful about in my own very arms. I started patting her back gently while all my body mechanisms began to arouse. Some few seconds later, I discovered that she began to raise her head up gradually from my shoulder towards my neck area while she continues to sob. This particular moment, I felt a serious and intense urge to devour her as her breath was cooling and soothing to my neck. Noticing a shift in position, I started rubbing her ear with much vigor as I was already aroused to the fullest. I later noticed that her supposed sobbing suddenly turned to a quiet moaning and she started breathing heavily. I tried to put my head down to adjust my head position, and this time around, her nose and lips were already in contact with my left cheek, while she continues breathing heavily. The temptation and feelings were too late to be reversed at this moment. An attempt to shift my head further to the direction of her face was met with a gentle lips-to-lips kiss from her. From there on, we locked our lips together and moved on a journey of intense and aggressive pleasure-filled kisses. The kisses were high octane as she almost swallowed my entire mouth. While this is ongoing, I reach out to her two beautiful oranges and gently releases them from the bra. A pair of oranges were so soft and fresh like that of a green on. So I put one of the oranges in my mouth while I gently rubbed the second with my hand. At this moment, she was already speaking in tongues while calling my name repeatedly. Thereafter, I reached out to her trouser and gently unbuttoned it as she assisted me in removing it completely by herself. She was left with only her blue pants on as I stood up and hastily undressed myself. Upon sighting my Gbola, I could see the excitement on her face as she quickly grabbed same and started massaging it while kissing me simultaneously. I was conscious of the fact that there was no protection available at that moment as she gently removed the last piece of clothing on her body and sat me down on the office chair. I sat immediately, wondering what she would do next. Then she moved closer to me and sat directly on my 6 inches long Gbola while facing me. The feeling was nothing to be compared with as I enjoyed every bit of the adventure from start to finish. I was about to offload the precious liquid metal. I tried to disengage my Gbola from her quickness, but she blocked all my moves as she gladly ride on till that kingdom come. After the whole encounter, she stood up and picked every bit of her clothing and moved to the general workstation. I quickly dressed up right there in her office and joined her at the general workstation. Right there, she had already finished dressing up, and I was ashamed to look at her eyes. Everywhere was quiet for a few seconds, but thereafter I decided to break the silence by saying I am very sorry for what just happened. I was surprised at her response as she responded by saying, "Come on, Callistus." I enjoyed it. I was so happy where I was standing in front of her as she moved closer to me and gave me another round of kisses. After that, I asked her if she was aware that we did not use any form of protection. She responded by saying, "Don't worry, I am not a baby." I joined her in her car as she drove off and dropped me at a nearby bus stop where I could take a bus going to my house. She was so happy going home as she drove off while I waited to join another bus taking me home. When she got home that day, she called me to check on me, and I could sense the joy in her voice. The following day, we resumed back to work, and she was looking happy, refreshed, and energized that the remaining colleagues of hers were even testifying as to her new and refreshing mood. At the end of work that day, we both stayed behind as usual, and we did it again, but this time around with a protection. This pattern has continued till this moment as she is madly into me and in love with me. This has begun to affect my relationship with my girlfriend Susan, as I did not always give her that attention that she deserves. On my boss's part, she has been joyfully coping with her abusive marriage, while she seeks happiness and unending joy with me at the office. I want to stop this practice, but I don't think she is stopping anytime soon, as she is deeply in love with me. This is my confession.